Good afternoon, one and all, and welcome to the presentation of the findings of CGA's latest business confidence survey, which was carried out amongst senior executives from across the UK eating and drinking out market. My name is Peter Martin, I'm Vice President of CGA, and I'm going to be your host for this special webinar this afternoon. Now, it's probably fair to say that this is by far the most important leader survey we have ever undertaken, providing, as it does, valuable and timely insight into the sector's anxieties, challenges, plans, and expectations, even if those at the moment are pretty modest. So a major thank you to Fourth, the leading tech provider, for its support as a partner in making this happen. We have actually over 700 people registered to join us today, and most of them, I think, are already online. Operators, suppliers, and investors, and not just from here in the UK, but also a smattering of my friends from the Atlantic Club, from across the United States and other parts too. But that does remind us that this is not just a domestic issue, it is a massive global crisis we are facing. So let's get on, and I'll start by introducing our speakers today. They are we've got James England, Carl Chesil.
Hey everyone.
And Charlie Mitchell. And I think there's a slide as well. Welcome all. Charlie is Director of Consumer Insight at CGA. Carl is Director of Food and Retail at CGA. And our special guest today is James England, Senior Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at Fourth, who's going to be providing some commentary. So it's probably a good time, James, to actually start with you now with a bit of perspective from Fourth, because obviously you're a major tech player in hospitality, not just here in the UK, but also in the US. So what are you seeing out there? And more importantly, what are you expecting from today?
Yeah, hello, Peter, and thank you for having us. Fourth, delighted to support this particular confidence survey. A big warm hello to everyone tuning in. I think really it's as simple as we're wanting this to be as helpful, thought-provoking and informative as possible, really because there's just so much to be thinking about, and especially for the so few that are currently not furloughed.
Thanks. And James will be coming back to us to provide some commentary and certainly being part of the Q&A later. But actually, I'm jumping ahead. Let's have a look at how we're going to be structuring today. Intro and welcome, which obviously we're in now. We're going to start first of all with the here and now, and that's going to be our basis, which Charlie Mitchell is going to take us through, and then we're going to move on quite rapidly to understanding the recovery planning, which we now know is already being taking place within the sector here in the UK. And I think it's probably fair to say that we have seen quite a major shift in focus from actually getting support from government really now to looking ahead as the government promises at some stage to lift lockdown. And then we're going to be looking at what people are actually expecting or not when reopening really does start. And then we're going to be going to have our Q&A session where we hope you will be writing in your own questions as well. And we've got plenty of them from ourselves as well. Anyway, let's have a look at some housekeeping. Fairly straightforward. That's a bit of a presentation of how you actually enter questions. Most of you are probably pretty familiar with doing webinars now, so I hope that helps. More importantly, we are recording today, and that recording will be sent out straight after this, along with the press release, which is also going out at the same time. And I think it's fair to say you'll be getting that sometime later this afternoon. Now, there's an awful lot of detail in this research. We're going to try and cover as much as we can this afternoon, but we may not go into all the detail you particularly want. So if there is anything and we don't answer it in the Q&As, please get in touch with Carl and Charlie, and we'll continue that conversation. So thank you to Fourth again. But let's get things moving, and ladies and gentlemen, here is Charlie Mitchell.
Thank you, Peter. Hello, everyone. So today I'll be taking you through current challenges for the market and how leaders are adapting and managing those challenges. But firstly, before we go into the details, just a little bit of background on this research. So A lot of you may be aware that we regularly run research with industry leaders through our business leaders and business confidence surveys. And these really are industry leaders. So 60% of our sample are CEO or MD level. And also there, we took this research just over a week ago. So the situation, as we know, is rapidly evolving by the minute, but this, I think, provides a great up-to-date snapshot of a time period, as Peter says, where operators have started to navigate some of those initial challenges around survival and are now looking at next phases in terms of recovery planning, which Carl will take you through later on. But firstly, like I say, on to current challenges and confidence in the market. So it feels like years ago that Carl, Peter and I presented our findings from our first business leaders research of the year back in February, when we were reporting optimism at a 4-year high. And the reasons for that were that there was far more confidence in the market from consumers. People were anticipating an increased frequency of visit. Also certainty around Brexit and a potential boom in tourism domestically as well. Fast forward just a couple of months and that optimism has totally disappeared. We're now seeing just 5% of leaders optimism at all in the market. And when looking at their own business, just 15% are optimistic for the coming year. And it's not just a lack of optimism, there's actually widespread pessimism, as would be expected given the current climate. So 52% of leaders who we surveyed are very pessimistic about the prospects of the market over the next 12 months. And it's interesting actually when we look at that by type of business. So predominantly smaller startup businesses are the ones who are driving this pessimism, perhaps private equity backed. Perhaps struggling with that investment, but also interestingly London over indexes as well. And when we look at the results split by London, it's fascinating. The results are far more polarized, but are leaning towards a more negative view. I think that's interesting given, rateable thresholds, and I know there's been a lot of talk about that recently, but I think that the shape of the London market post this current period may be significantly different to what we know and love. Of course, at the moment there is no recognisable out-of-home market. So when we took this research a couple of weeks ago, 75% of leaders reported that they had completely shut down all their sites for the time being, while others were trading to the public either through grocery or delivery. And some, as we know, doing great work out there in the community with local support initiatives as well, helping the NHS. But as I say, the majority were completely shutting down all of their sites. Of those who were trading, either through delivery or grocery, they just had, on average, 1 in 4 sites that were open to the public. And it's quite interesting actually through our research, as you may be aware, we've been doing regular consumer research during this time as well. And consumers have really responded to the sites that are staying open and are kind of helping with that community cause. I think one of the key things that we're seeing from consumers is a desire to support local. We know that there's going to be some worry about returning into the market, but certainly consumers are appreciating what the hospitality industry is going through and are looking to support. But for operators, the main concern at the moment is simply surviving. Cash flow, maintaining funds just to get through this initial challenge was definitely what leaders were telling us were the key issues before then looking ahead to reopening. Things like just keeping the cash to keep going, paying landlords and creditors kept on getting mentioned as the greatest challenges that they are facing. So no surprise then actually that when we asked what the greatest challenges were for businesses currently, it was all around rent payments. So 2/3 of leaders telling us that they are either their greatest challenge or a major challenge at the moment. After that, they've got secondary challenges around investment, be that from investors, from banks, or access to loans, which was another area where leaders told us that they were struggling. Secondary to that again, so payments to furloughed staff. And it's interesting really when we ask about what people are planning in terms of their rent repayments, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach here, and I think the majority of leaders are looking at a varied approach across the estate, with probably a mixture of all of the options. But what is interesting is that just 1 in 20 leaders are planning payment in full in terms of their rents, when we asked a couple of weeks ago. So no surprise then, the business leaders support the idea of a debt enforcement moratorium. We asked about this, and 9 in 10 said that they do support that, initially for 9 months, up to a year. So there's definitely a lot of support behind this idea, and something that I know conversation is ongoing with at the moment as well. And we asked the straight up question, what would be the next best measure that the government could use to fund or support your business? A 9-month rent-free period came out on top, so 7 out of 10 leaders said that would be their next preferred option, followed by Operation Earthquake, and then removing the £51,000 rateable value threshold. And leaders are taking full advantage of the furlough scheme, so nearly all businesses are furloughing nearly all staff. You can see there 83% of businesses furloughing the vast majority of their business. However, anecdotally, we're now seeing that perhaps some head office staff are starting to come off furlough as operators look from beyond that initial survival phase to the next phase of recovery planning and starting to figure out what that looks like. Interestingly as well, senior teams have shared the burden. So from other research that we undertook, the average senior team are taking pay cuts of around 32%, and the vast majority are taking cuts of way over 20%. So while furlough is going on, there's kind of broader pains to be had as well. And while staff are on furlough, companies are not at the moment looking to top up salaries in general. Those who are doing so excluding trunk payments. And when we're asking about kind of engagement and how people are keeping up to date with their staff and maintaining clear communication, the majority are doing so weekly. So making sure that they are in communication with their furloughed staff and their furloughed workforce at least weekly. Typically that is through the likes of group emails, WhatsApp, but increasingly new and varied ways to keep up to date. And make sure that staff stay with them, stay on board through what is understandably a difficult time. 1 in 8 business leaders tell us that they're engaging with their furloughed workforce daily, maintaining that two-way dialogue and ensuring that these people will want to work in the hospitality industry going forward. Because actually that's a bit of a concern. So back in February, when we looked at the biggest challenges for the market, staffing was a huge concern, given Brexit and given the pressures on the sector anyway. And that probably has died off a little bit, but still there is concern around the loss of quality workers to other industries during this period, with just around half that are concerned at the moment about that potentially being an issue moving forward. And back to the key issue of furlough, we asked operators what they feel and how long they feel that this should continue for. And what is clear is that operators do not want a cliff edge. Tapered schemes seem to be preferable, and the vast majority of people are saying either on a sector-by-sector basis or for 3 months after sectors reopen. And of course, we don't know exactly what that'll look like in terms of staffing, in terms of operational and legislative perspective, but what we will need is starting to understand what that looks like, and that's what Carl will be taking you through shortly. But yeah, I think that for the moment, operators looking for that initial guarantee from government that this furlough scheme will continue. So back to you, Peter.
Thanks very much, Charlie. On the people front, I think I might want to bring James back in here as well, please. James, are you there?
I am here, Peter.
Excellent, good, the technology works. I mean, the whole people thing is fundamental because apart from stating the obvious, if we're going to get back in business, our teams are going to be the people who are actually going to do it on the front line. And Charlie was talking about the concern there about losing quality people, but also staying in touch as well. What are you getting back from the people you're talking to about how people are staying in touch with their teams?
Yeah, so clearly masses of effort to keep in touch on that weekly basis, seeing lots of pub quizzes, weekly virtual trips to the pub, using tools like Zoom or Team. To Charlie's point, the majority of non-video comms is still happening through email and WhatsApp, but some operators are taking advantage of this period to put in integrated tools such as Yapster, Engage. Some operators are choosing not to deploy these, however, at the moment because they have concerns about not enough people at headquarters to answer any questions or queries that do arise. Our customer feedback for those who have established comms tools and dedicated tools, they found that this period has allowed them to get over 95% adoption, a significantly higher number than previously, and lots of operators encouraging their employees to post pictures and videos of what they're up to whilst on furlough, but clearly probably not everything. Just a point, by the way, just a point on those tools for those who may not know, there are some initiatives for no nonsense easy access to these communications tools at this time, and that means cost-wise, in an effort to help, as is the case for tools like WageStream, to help in the efforts to get DOSH into employees' hands earlier.
Interesting about losing staff. Have you got any sense of if people have sort of wandered off or gone back to home countries, say overseas workers, or is there a sense of they're being able to hold their teams together?
Well, we see it's evolving all the time, isn't there? And there's some sentiment at the moment that are as concerned with employees actually heading back to their home countries too. So that's relatively new, even in the shadow of Brexit.
And that's the question will be answered as people start bringing people back and trying to get them ready for reopening. So let's start moving on to that. Thanks very much, James. We'll have you back a bit later on for the broader Q&As. Now I'm going to bring back Carl Chesil, who's going to take us through the next part of the presentation. Over to you, Carl.
Thanks, Peter. So as was suggested, Charlie's covered some of the key challenges that have come out of the Business Confidence Survey. So we're seeing people use the coronavirus job retention scheme successfully. We're seeing some still ongoing challenges around cash flow, particularly around rents. The rest of the session, I'm going to talk about some of the recovery planning and how people are focused on reopening. I think the first thing to say is there is a lot of planning going on. So business leaders absolutely get the need for planning now. So they're moving from this survival phase, as Charlie talked about, into recovery. And as you can see there, 8 out of 10 have started some form of recovery planning. And actually people are trying to plan for a whole range of different scenarios, which isn't easy. But clearly there's a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen after the lockdown and when people are allowed to reopen. So 72% are planning for a whole range of different scenarios. So we've got a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, and needing to be agile really to adapt those plans as legislation emerges and as ultimately the lockdown ends. I think there's definitely an expectation that any reopening will be phased. We've obviously heard a lot about this. It's interesting to see the data behind this. So actually, 1 in 20 think there's going to be a mass reopening across the hospitality industry. Most think there's going to be some phasing. 1 in 3 believe that might be based on sector alone, so potentially restaurants being allowed to reopen quicker. Some people think it might be focused on capacity initially or on location type, but actually the majority of leaders telling us, over 53% actually, that it's likely to be a phased reopening based on all of the above. So a combination of sector, capacity and also location type. But the smart money is absolutely on that phase opening. So in terms of those plans, as you can see there, 62% are planning firmly for a phased reopening. There are nearly 1 in 3 that would like to open more if the government allows, but obviously there's some great unknowns there. And as I said, really, that's why I think people are having to plan for a whole range of different scenarios. There's no one size one-size-fits-all plan that can be put in place at the moment. We do believe, and leaders are telling us this, the shape of the market is likely to be different following the reopen. So obviously all outlets temporarily closed at the moment, with the exception of some delivery. Actually, moving forward, 1 in 3 say they're permanently going to close outlets. So the size and shape of the market is likely to look very, very different at the other side. And actually 1 in 3, nearly 31%, have yet to decide. So I think we can see that number growing even further potentially. So sadly, there will be casualties, there will be closures, and the landscape will be slightly different. When we asked leaders about sector by sector, what proportion of the sector they thought would reopen, as you can see there, hotels, people were most bullish about, thinking 85% were likely to reopen. But across restaurants, bars and pubs, there are likely to be some closures if we believe the projections that the leaders are sharing with us. And actually, most hardest hit would be late night outlets in this scenario. So over 30% of late night outlets might be affected. And that's managed and independents. And so we've already seen over a number of years the decline in the number of nightclubs, but clearly there's a sense that late night certainly might be last to open, but certainly might be challenged longer term. And there's lots and lots of data in this slide, but fundamentally, as you can see, it's affecting every sector though. So there's no one sector that's isolated from potential market contraction. Just picking on restaurants, nearly 75% of leaders predict the restaurant market will open at less than 80% of its previous size. So across the board, we're looking largely in expectations of a market reduction of around 20 to 30%. So some quite stark changes to the landscape. And sadly, as I say, there will be some businesses that don't make it. Charlie talked about London and the complexities, and we get asked about London a lot. Partly, obviously, it's the capital. It's a very vibrant part of the hospitality economy, but the picture isn't really clear. So we are seeing on the one hand that a greater proportion of leaders are expecting to close large proportions of their estate in London. Yet conversely, we're seeing, when we ask the question, are you likely to keep sites open or closed, a higher proportion of people are less likely to close outlets in London. So there's a bit of a polarisation, I think, of opinion here. I think there's a lot of nuance and detail behind it. Clearly with London, it's very dependent on workforce, on international travel, on events, and the speed at which they're able to return, I think will dictate some of this. But again, I don't think there's one standard approach, and business leaders are looking at different location types very, very differently. When we look at the reopen then, so moving out of this sort of recovery phase and planning phase into actually opening the doors again, people are going to need funding to do that. So Charlie's already highlighted some of the challenges that people have around accessing funding, and obviously just maintaining cash when we fundamentally venues don't have any revenue currently. There's the expectation that people will need around 9% of turnover to begin trading. So not insignificant levels of funding are going to be needed to reopen. So it's not just about surviving the lockdown, it's making sure there's enough cash to reopen. It's not simply a case of open the door and turn the lights on. The good news, I guess, is that over half are confident about accessing those funds. You can say 57% of all leaders are confident about accessing those funds. But conversely, we've got over a quarter that aren't confident, and that number grows in London. So I think there are some real challenges about how people can get access to funding. And bearing in mind, this is a survey, as Charlie highlighted, that's completed by many senior business leaders in our sector. If they're struggling in some instances to get funding, then it does make you worry about some of the smaller and independent operators. So I think the landscape will look very different. One thing that I think slightly surprised me, but also is a positive, is that people think they can mobilise quickly. So in terms of all the planning that's going on, the majority of leaders think that within a week they will be able to mobilise and open sites, and a further 20% within 2 weeks. I've had a range of conversations across this spectrum, and I know some people with quite significant estates, it is going to take them longer. And as you can see, 10% are looking at over a month to get everything sorted and ready for opening. And I think it depends probably how agile, how focused your operation is on particular parts of the market as to how quickly you can achieve that. We talked already about people engagement, and that's been really important throughout this process. Hospitality is obviously built on the warm welcome that people get when they go into a venue, and good service being a really important driver in the sector. So that engagement that's gone on means that people do feel that within maybe 7 days, they could get people ready, and certainly another 26% within 2 weeks. So the majority of people within that 1 to 2 week, by 2 week period, would be able to have their people ready for reopen, which again is a real positive. And actually, interestingly, I don't have a slide on it, but in terms of the sort of training that people are looking at, Some of it is absolutely operational. So some of the operational changes that are going to need to be made around hygiene and social distancing. But actually, number two, nearly half of leaders said their training is likely to be around emotional well-being. So recognising the challenges that their people may have experienced during the lockdown, but also may experience in coming back to work. That is a real positive that's shining through, that people care about that. And actually, a lot of emphasis is going to go on culture during the reboot. There aren't obviously the funds to reward people financially, but people are focused on how we can review and enhance the culture, the strong culture that existed in many of these businesses prior to the lockdown, how they can ensure team meetings, away day, that can create sort of face-to-face interaction, but also give the necessary training so that people are ready. When we look beyond sort of staff and costs challenges, well, obviously, any regulations the government puts onto operators is going to be a challenge. So it's not surprising that's often the biggest challenge, or certainly a major challenge to people, any government regulations. But even without those regulations from government, there are obviously going to be key operational changes that are needed. And that's what comes out number one on this question. So changes that are going to need to be made to how places are run, how social distancing percentage is informed, hygiene programs, etc. And these two, I suppose, dwarf some of the others, but I don't want to lose the focus on some of these others. So 29% of leaders are saying biggest or major challenges are likely to be things like food supply, drink supply. So they look minuscule in relation to some of these absolute core challenges about hygiene, social distancing, regulations, but I think they're really fundamentally important to the reopen. And certainly the conversations we're having with operators and suppliers reflects that. There is a need to sort of re-engage that supply chain. So I talked about hygiene. It's fundamentally, there's no escaping that that's going to be key. So there's a big focus when we ask leaders what they're going to implement post-lockdown on hygiene initiatives. So 78% are planning to have an increased focus here. I thought what was interesting was almost as high as the increased communication. So I think there's a sense from operators that they need to be able to tell their staff, but particularly their consumers, what they're doing. So we get that message across clearly so that consumers feel more comfortable in their venues. 2 and 4 on that chart are increased space, reduced covers, reduced capacity. So I think the sense that there will be need to be more social distancing enforced. But again, when you look beyond those things like reduced food menu items, I remember speaking to a lot of operators around Brexit, and people were planning Brexit menus, and I think we'll start to see some of that planning coming through. So people looking at a reduced food menu in particular, because food obviously has a higher waste component to it, but also looking at reduced drink items as well. And people are definitely going to focus on delivery. So I think even though, as Charlie said, it's perhaps not been sort of taken up in mass levels initially, I think delivery is something that people are going to really, really focus on and have to get right when we come out the other side as well. Just a couple of other points on that slide really about sustainability and ethics. And we talked a lot about that sort of pre-lockdown, but I think what's happened has really shined a sort of magnifying glass on that. And some of those local things, as Charlie touched on, but also sort of treating staff right, treating the environment right, focus on sustainability. I think these are coming to the fore even more so. And when we ask consumers what their intentions are, and we are going to continue to track this because I think consumer sentiment will change, less than a quarter will be comfortable just going straight out tomorrow and acting almost the way they used to. So there is an element of people that will do that. The good news, I guess, is consumers will return. So you've got 31% saying yes, they would return, but they would be cautious. And I think that word caution is really, really important. So we might see caution in terms of frequency, but also in terms of the restrictions and practices that people are going to be looking for from their operators. So 21% saying yes, they would come as long as there are those added precautions in place. So I think there's definitely a sense that frequency will be hit, but there are things that operators can do. So moving tables and chairs apart, providing free hand sanitizer, 60% of consumers are looking for that. These enhanced cleaning protocols, also technology playing a part as well. So the ability to pay contactless. I know operators are also looking at digital menus, pre-order, so any way in which it can be ensured that there's a minimum cut down on touch points, literally, I think will be seen as a positive. Staff wearing protective equipment on the right is something I know is quite alien to a lot of operators, and there's a lot of aversion to that. So hopefully those restrictions won't come through, but it is something interesting that consumers are saying, albeit it's towards the bottom end of that list. There is an expectation of protective equipment in some instances, which doesn't necessarily sit well with the kind of warm welcome of hospitality. We thought it was quite useful to look at frequency. I touched on it already, from both a consumer perspective and from a business leader perspective. So this slide shows leaders' predictions on the level of consumer frequency, and 97% believe that there'll be a decrease in the 6 months after lockdown. 1 in 3, so consumers a little bit more bullish, predict their visit frequency will decrease. So 2/3 are expecting their visit frequency to be fairly similar to what it was prior to the lockdown. So I think that's a positive, but still, if 1 in 3 are doing that, and obviously if the regulations to ensure more spacing, then it's undoubtedly going to hit revenue. So I'm sure leaders are right, and that there will be a slowdown in footfall on the reopen, and it will be a slow and steady return to customer numbers, certainly that we're used to experience as a sector. I think one of the things that also came through really strongly is, I mentioned about sort of ethics. Consumers are getting what a lot of hospitality businesses have done through this period. So we've seen free hand sanitizer being produced by suppliers. We've seen people donating stock, free meals being provided to the NHS or discounts. So I think the consumers get the good work that's being done, and I know a lot of this has been done with absolutely the right intention and not for PR and marketing, but I do think that brands will benefit at the other side. So 70% of consumers are saying that they're more likely to visit or engage with brands who've offered their services during the crisis, and conversely 3/4 of consumers are less likely to visit brands that have been perceived to handle the outbreak poorly. So I think the good work that people have done is hopefully going to shine through longer term. This is my penultimate slide before I just summarise. So this is asking business leaders what they think the longer term changes in consumer behaviour will do. So we know in the short term there's going to be changes, and some of that will be government regulated, and some of it will be decided by the operators. So hygiene, there's a sense that that's not going to go away. That increased hygiene demand is going to remain. That increased frequency of eating out that I've talked about. But third on here is that reluctance to visit city centres and town centres. So I talked about London already, but I think other city centres will have some of those same challenges. We don't know at what speed people will be allowed to return to work in city centres, or even if that model of workplace versus working from home is going to change. But obviously going to sort of busy venues in town centres, people might be more reluctant to do that than to go to suburbs or your village pub. There is this increased desire to support local that, again, Charlie touched on. Increased frequency delivery, which I touched on earlier, but I think leaders are seeing this as well. They expect this consumer behaviour to continue post-lockdown, and people will be looking more and more at delivery, and brands that can successfully leverage their offer across both delivery and on-site, I think will benefit. Ethics I've already talked about, and that desire to support independence. But I think whilst it's also about independence, as I said, those that have also been seen to support the wider society in this period, I think will also shine through. So just to summarise then, before we open up for questions, I think the sentiment has shifted massively, and it's no great surprise in what is a global pandemic, the likes of none of us have experienced before. So from some high levels of optimism, there are massive concerns, but people I think are starting to move away from actually navigating those concerns through to recovery and planning, and a sense that there will be a new normal, albeit that will be phased. And by phase, I think we're talking about openings, but also in that return to some sort of consumer normality. As Charlie talked about, cash flow is still a massive concern. Rents are a big unresolved issue, and there's a lot of lobbying going on, I think, to try to come to a consensus around rents, but there's no one approach at the moment that's being implemented. I think the coronavirus job retention scheme has been used extensively, but needs extending. Charlie talked about that clarity of 3-month blocks. I think there's also a sense that whilst it might taper, that actually some support is still going to be needed after the reopen, because footfall is going to be lower, and it's not going to be a case of everyone can open and suddenly everything's going to be okay again. Operators have focused massively on their staff. They recognise the importance of people. It comes up in all our business leader surveys, so engagement with them is high. As I said, not all sites will reopen, so we will see the market contract. It's something at CGA we're going to continue to track with our market growth monitor. Hopefully the leaders are overly pessimistic and we won't see the closure at the levels predicted, but it's undoubted that the market shape will change. But I think following that phase reopen, that offer is going to look different. So as I said, some of that will be enforced, it will be government regulations, it will be at the request of customers, or even for staff as well, to ensure social distancing and additional hygiene programs. But it'll also potentially differ in terms of menu, in terms of drinks range, maybe delivery having an even more increased focus. I mean, the positive is that customers will return. There's a huge love for the sector. People really value the experiences they get in hospitality. But I think it's going to take time to return to normal. So it'll be a cautious return. And ongoing support, as I said, it's absolutely going to be needed from government. So that's my bit of the section. Thank you for listening. Hopefully you found that useful. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass back, I think, to Peter and others to host some questions.
Thanks very much, Carl. That's great. And that's the end of the formal presentations. And perhaps if we can get James and Charlie to rejoin us, we can get into the questions and answers. One question has been asked, and it's because I didn't give full information at the beginning of the show, is that yes, the deck will be shared with everybody along with the recording and the press release as well, because I think we've had one question where somebody I think has lost sight of the presentation during it. Technology we are all learning about, but yes, you'll be able to get everything you need, and obviously any more detailed questions get in contact with the team. We have got questions coming in, and I think there's a few areas we want to explore. I mean, what became clear out of what you were saying, Carl, is that quite rightly, well, not surprisingly, one of the biggest areas of concerns is around what the government's going to say and how industry operators are going to adapt to that. But there's this area of supply chain, and I think perhaps some of us were perhaps a bit surprised with how quickly people believe they can get back up in business, because I think what we're seeing is slightly different. James, from your point of view as a supplier, but also someone who monitors stock control within the industry, what are you seeing? What's your view on how quickly we can get supply chain back up?
Yeah, so the suppliers, they really do have a number of genuine concerns. One is about traffic and the ability to be able to deliver on time, i.e. the sheer clog of people who might choose to use their cars over public transport. There's concerns over fulfillment. Suppliers really do want to be in on the opening plans. This is what they're telling us. Is the operator's business going to open with 300 or 300 sites over what period? They're worried about having to change price if lower quantities. Will credit terms change? So really, it is to that point that they just want to be in on the conversation as soon as possible. The US, as we know, opened up on Friday for 25% seating capacity in their restaurants in some states. And we're already seeing examples where there hasn't been the food or the cleaning supplies available to trade, and lots more reasons beside.
Because that's the point. It's not just food and drink. There's other things that people may need to have, which is PPE, sanitary products, which they wouldn't normally get in certainly the quantities they're going to need.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. There's huge concerns over that, and I think we're making our own inquiries too with our supplier customers, and so what really are the genuine concerns over some of that PPE equipment too, and so we can share that.
Because obviously, Carl, in CGA, a lot of the work is done with suppliers both in drink and the food sector. What are you hearing from them about what they are anticipating?
I think, James talked, the thing that resonated most was that need to keep talking. And I think I highlighted in the research that operators always have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C. So some of the uncertainty is genuine uncertainty. So not knowing exactly how many sites are going to open, etc. It's important that there's collaboration through this period. I think from a supplier perspective, there's a sense that it might take longer, certainly on the food side, than certainly operators are thinking to kind of re-engage that supply chain. So, we're getting it from a farm via wholesalers in some cases to a restaurant, I think could be a challenge and could take 3 to 4 weeks in some instances. So I think that element of keeping talking there'll be a phase obviously of transition before the reopen, hopefully, when there's a bit of notice given about some of the easing of measures. And I think at that point it's going to be really, really important for people to talk. I think flexibility is going to be really, really important. So people might not want the same menu they had before. So not holding people to contracts necessarily that were in place, recognising there are financial pressures on operators. So appreciating, of course, there is financial pressures on suppliers as well. But I think there's a real sensitivity of how that can be done collaboratively, really, because I think it has to be done collaboratively.
I mean, certainly, I think we're getting a sense from certainly the bigger operators, particularly the big managed pub chains, they're looking to 3 to 4 weeks to get up and running. But that's going to be like everything else. This will evolve, and we'll see how it goes. And that's why we'll be coming back into the market. We're asking more questions, not just consumers, but also business leaders as the picture evolves. I think another area which you guys touched on, I think again perhaps surprised us from where we sat, is that perhaps delivery hasn't taken off perhaps as much in the UK as probably we've seen in the States, because I certainly know the data we're getting back from CGA Nielsen out of Chicago, even within casual dining sites which have still been able to operate, takeout and deliveries almost up to 25 to 30% of what would be normal trading. So we're not seeing that in UK. James, what's the issue you think it is? Is it concerns about health and hygiene? Is it the delivery mechanism, the arrangements, or is it the consumer? What do you think?
Well, yeah, delivery and takeout is happening a lot in the US. I think there are some subtle differences, or not so subtle differences too. I think really it's if you widen the conversation to off-premise sales, obviously there's a huge car driving culture in the US, and a lot of people have often driven to go and collect their food. And so what we're seeing a lot of initiatives, a lot of technology initiatives to underpin curbside collection, car park collection, ordering remotely in a big shopping mall, and being able to get multiple food and drink options from a number of suppliers at once. So there's some massive innovation going on there. And when I speak to our UK customers, click and collect can go so far, depending on where the location is. As a general public, we're happy to walk so far, but we don't all have cars in the same way that the US does.
Yeah, but I think we've seen with the queues outside KFC and BK drive-throughs when they open here in the UK, there's a demand. Charlie, what are consumers? I know you've touched on it, but what are consumers saying about delivery and their desire to use it?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, really. Fundamentally, there is a demand for delivery, and we saw that certainly in the first couple of weeks of lockdown. There was an anticipated surge in people looking for delivery from their restaurants that they usually visit. That hasn't really played through, as you say. I think that we see usage at the exact same level now as it was at the start of lockdown. Perhaps interestingly, one of the things that's coming through is people who are using it more frequently are saying that they will continue to do so. And I think that perhaps has been not the range that people expected when it first started, and some people have tried it and totally switched off, kind of had it once and then never been back. But yeah, certainly I think that demand is still there, and perhaps could carry on going forward as well. The other interesting point is it's not just food. Some of the research that we're doing is saying that people want the full menu available. Again, that'll throw up challenges in terms of supply chain, but definitely there's an element of people looking for drinks as well within that delivered offer.
Now, I'm going to start taking some of the questions we've got coming in, and we're going to stay with consumers. So stay with you, Charlie. And I don't know if you can answer this. It says, how quickly do you predict consumer confidence will bounce back? Bounce could be an interesting phrase. I think, though, what we're seeing, I think, is in terms of concern, although you talked about, people want to get back to the local. Number one and number two concern is health and safety. And that's not just doing Joe Wicks courses. It is concern about catching the virus and keeping their families safe. And the other one is financial. So taking those considering, do you have a sense of when that may come back? Or is it really too early to say? without putting words into your mouth.
No, I think, you know, the early signs are that there will be, you know, a hesitance to certainly venture into city and town centres, be that from just getting in there and getting on public transport. That's going to have an impact. And yeah, from a financial perspective, people are looking at the financial situation. We know that 85% of GB adults are very concerned about the financial implications of the current crisis. That is going to have an impact on confidence, and I think it's not going to be, as Carl mentions, turn on the switch and everyone will be out of the usual capacity that they were previously. It will trickle through, and I think that there'll be some milestones within that, be it eventually a vaccine, be it that enough of the population that are going out, or enough of a person's social group that are fine with entering in the market, that they then will do, but certainly not going to be overnight.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, there's some other comments coming through, going back to a very good point made about supply chain as well, that it's not just us, it's the problems Spain and Italy are having producing their own harvest, particularly with getting migrant workers in there, let alone the problems we may have here in UK, and that's a point worth making. I think the other one is probably move on. There's people starting to talk about technology. Will technology, I think a lot of times when we're in crises, some habits just die out, but other ones are accelerated. I think probably the only prediction we can make is that use of technology is going to be more used. The question here was really about use of delivery and prepayment. Is that going to become a lot more prevalent, do you think, James? You're the tech expert here on the panel at the moment.
Yeah, I think we're going to see the rise of a number of tech initiatives, and I think we might even be surprised at the breadth of them as well. So clearly it's all about minimizing touch of publicly handled items, whether that be the menu, the PDQ machine, etc. So we've already mentioned lots of click and collect, prepaying. We hear of operators talking about putting in prepay initiatives where your meal might even be paid for before you've sat down. Health checks we hear about too, and digital menus have been mentioned. And one interesting one from the US was that nobody anticipated the hassle of policing the bathroom doors. So the handful of customers that you've got all wanting to pee at the same time and not being able to control that.
It's hard for technology to solve that one, James, isn't it?
Yeah. Obviously, you've been doing a lot of work, obviously, up to now in terms of tracking consumer use of technology in hospitality. What are the trends you think might accelerate even more than they did before?
Yeah, it's definitely in this area of bring your own device, being able to order and pay in that sort of way. Digital menus.
Personalization, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'll be obviously the confidence out there appears to be quite mixed, but one can imagine an appetite to for less touch of stuff that isn't yours.
Yeah, Carl, what are you picking up on that? Because I was saying, the CGA have done a lot of research up to now and consumer attitude. It tends to be younger people. Do you think that's going to be the drive and easier to get those guys back?
It could be, yeah. I think it's not solely down to demographics, but clearly there's a sense amongst some young people that they're a bit more invincible, and particularly because this virus has affected certain demographic groups more than others. So I think we probably do expect the younger customers to return quicker. But I think it's a little bit more nuanced to that. I think Charlie was right, and I agree with him really, that it might also depend on your peer groups. But also, as I said, how quickly, I mentioned in my piece, people return to work. There's a lot of socialising around the workplace as well. And I think the speed at which that happens as well will have an impact. So I think it's definitely one to watch. I don't think there's a certain answer at the moment. I think, as I kind of explained in my section, I think it'll be a cautious return, but I'm hoping there will be those milestones that Charlie talked about, and we can sort of draw a line in the sand and say we're kind of back to normal. But I think it's going to be slow and steady to get us back to that point.
Yeah. And there's a lot more comments coming in about supply chain and people picking up about payment terms as well. There was something which came out, I think, I don't know if you put it in the presentation, I should know this obviously because I've been through it enough times. you talked about attitudes to suppliers. I think one of the things that came out is that people who offer more flexible terms were going to be looked on, not surprisingly, a lot more favourably than perhaps other suppliers. Am I right in thinking that? I think we saw that. Is that right, Charlie?
Yeah, I don't think it did make the cut in the end, but certainly I think, as Carl mentions, the collaboration between suppliers and operators is really key at the moment, and that includes flexible pricing. We know that for many operators it is going to be reduced capacity. That means volumes will be impacted, which again will then have an impact on payment. And certainly, actually, what we did find from the research was that's been going well so far. So the collaboration between suppliers and operators, on the whole, has been very good. And actually, there has been, a kind of groundswell of positive opinion from operators towards how suppliers have been able to adapt in a flexible manner.
Okay, can I move on to perhaps the capacity? One of the questions we've been asked as we move towards the end here is really a question about when do people expect to get back to 100% capacity? I'm not sure people do. I mean, we've asked various different questions, Charlie, on this. Can we get a sense? Because we know not everybody's going to open up. It's about a third who are looking to close, only another third say they will plan to open all sites, and then we know there's going to be a phasing, and we know the government's working on that. Are we getting some sort of sense of how long it will get back to anywhere near the sort of levels of trade we had at the end of last year?
It is like you say, it's multifaceted, isn't it? So, there will be phasing by sector, there'll probably be phasing by location type, there'll be phasing across individual estates, and we know that another consideration will be staff, so the workforce, and there'll need to be considerations there around, are they okay to be socially distanced in certain sites? So that's going to have an impact on the number of sites that are open and that are permitted to open. That you've then got the additional consideration of capacity and in terms of demand. So how quickly a consumer is going to return back to that normal demand, and also the then spend as well. So are people going to be eating and drinking as much as they did towards the back end of last year? And probably that isn't going to happen for certainly, when we look back at the end of this year versus the end of last year, we won't be at the same level. So I think that we're talking pretty far down the line before we can look at that kind of 100% scenario. But certainly there's a lot of nuances within that. I mean, we've got all the data behind it to kind of build a few models and forecasts sophisticatedly. But there's a lot of variables at play at the moment.
Yeah,
I was going to say, Charlie, I think we'll obviously continue to ask the question because sentiment is changing. I know from your team, you've done a whole series of pieces of research throughout this, and sentiment is shifting all along that. So I think tracking it moving forward is going to be really, really important.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Going back to perhaps another area on this, because if we're looking, say, if anyone reads Economist, they're looking at 90% economy. So the overall economy is going to have an effect on the way we operate. We know other bits of the economy are just as badly hit as us. So if we're saying 20 to 30% of sites won't reopen and 90% economy, that's could be sort of 60. It's about 2/3 of the market, and that presumably also means that we've got an issue on staff. People are talking about staff coming back, but we're talking about companies potentially going out of business. There could be not staff shortages, but more even long-term layoffs and redundancies. Are we getting any sense of what people are looking for there, perhaps in terms of even working with more technology and automation in markets? That's a broad issue, but I think something which people are going to get their head around. Have you got any sense of that, James?
Well, I definitely think there's going to be a change in this staffing. Again, right in the middle of so many unknowns, who's going to stay in the country, etc. And yes, clearly there might be these inevitable layoffs, but I think we're going to see perhaps the rise of some role, the rise of the host who might be responsible for the socially distancing measures for the foreseeable future, more buses. We're seeing plenty of our customers talk about the need for more buses, cleaners, 24/7 on those ones as well. So yes, there's definitely going to be an evolution, which is really, on that staffing point, yes, huge question mark around availability or redistribution, but you do quite quickly come back to the productivity aspect as well. And that being, we're seeing everybody take a complete fresh look at labour productivity, not least because the games have changed, but this off-premise and on-premise business, for anyone who is balancing that for however long, something else we've seen from those restaurants that have opened up earlier across the pond is they struggled with that. They absolutely struggled on Friday, Saturday and Sunday and Monday. They really struggled to get the balance between their new in restaurant diners and their new takeout stuff.
Yeah. And also we know with social distancing, particularly around kitchens, and we've got some evidence about how that's working, because obviously QSR's doing drive-throughs and takeaways, and also we've still got ghost kitchens in operation. We may have fewer people in kitchens by the pure necessity of regulations. So we can, I think there's an awful lot to, I don't think we've got all the answers, but it's understanding how that's going to pan out and what roles may change. And as you say, with hosts, we may have new roles coming into the market. I think the other thing is someone's mentioned more about technology all the way through the consumer role. What about in terms of using technology for staff more? Are you picking up more of that, say, Carl, for what you're seeing in technology? And I'll come back to you as well, James, on that one.
Yeah, I mean, James touched a little bit on this earlier. I think people have had to embrace new technology to communicate with staff in the current environment. We've all done it. We've even managed to find out how to use GoToWebinar, which we didn't know last week. So I think there's a sense that people are using technology to communicate in different ways with people. And Charlie touched on it earlier, because we have a training business as part of our sister group, we're seeing some of those people start to come back from furlough. So I think that is really interesting for us to see how that plays through. But I think how people communicate with them is going to be really important. But also, I touched on it in the deck, really. I think the other area is what that engagement's about. And I think, training around emotional well-being, making sure that communications are around culture and things like that. And I think these are the things that seem to be coming to the fore. And I think technology can absolutely play a part in that. There's lots of solutions that people are using to do that.
Yeah, I'd agree with Carl. And I think, as a society, we've really embraced this whole video communications too. I think we see a lot more of that, perhaps. We finally got used to it in so many areas where we weren't doing that, and no one wants to replace the important face-to-face that this industry has been about. But yeah, these are feeling to be quite useful additional ways to complement comms, training, well-being, etc. for sure.
I can take one final question, and we've got a lot of questions still unanswered, but what I will do is we'll take those, and they can be very useful for the sort of things we can actually put back into future questionnaires, whether it's back to senior leaders or whether it's for our consumer research as well. But one thing about consumers, because one of the big trends in the drinks market has been premiumization. I think there's a concern, are we going back to value more? Is premiumization going to be the key, Charlie? What are consumers gonna want when they go back? Because obviously a lot of them are getting to the habit of drinking at home, having the big night in, and we've been writing about that quite a lot. I mean, it doesn't take away from what's going to happen in pubs, bars and restaurants, but what's your sense if you were going to bet on it?
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't think it's a straightforward answer, but I think, there will be polarization. Some people will be value, but if anything, I can see, those treat occasions continuing to happen. I'm sure that, people are sick and tired of drinking at home. I certainly am. And wanting to go out into the trade and trade up and enjoy something that they don't usually have at home. I think that we'll continue to see acceleration of that premiumization trend, and I'm sure there'll be others within it as well. As you mentioned, health, well-being, that was stuff that was already impacting the market, and that will continue, as will the likes of looking for niche and better quality drinks and food.
And actually, I will have one other last question, actually. Sorry about that. But Carl, and it goes back to why we're in this situation at the moment, the virus itself. Do we have any sense of what operators or even consumers are feeling about potential for a second wave? How cautious are they? Are they taking that into consideration?
I don't think we asked anything specifically in the research, but I think there is a genuine concern, obviously, societally about that. So certainly anecdotally from my conversations with operators, they don't want a second lockdown. I mean, that's, stating the obvious to a certain extent, but I think they'd almost rather wait until they can, and even a sense of people actually waiting until further down the line to reopen. Almost the government saying you can reopen is fine so long as there is the right support. Actually opening with lower footfall with additional regulations that got to take into account is going to be a real cost pressure. So I think they would rather wait cautiously and open slightly later if that's what's needed. Albeit everyone's desperate to get open again, and as consumers, as Charlie said, we're all desperate to go back to the venues we love. But the last thing the sector needs is a second wave.
Indeed. And on that reality check, thank you all very much. Thank you for taking part. Time has caught up with us. I hope it's been useful. So thank you, our panelists, Carl, James and Charlie. Thank you very much. And thank you, James. Thank you to your team at Fourth for supporting us today. Also, thank you to Nil Khalifa and Holly Oakley for the administration of today and production on the day, for keeping the tech working. Thank you very much. I think we had a few problems outside, but not too many, which is good. Also, thank you very much to the consumer team at CGA for turning around that data and prepping it so quickly to get that deck out, which of course will be coming to you guys along with the press release and the recording as well. CGA will be continuing to research and actually mapping out on a weekly, monthly basis about how not just planning goes, but how the recovery goes as well. Thank you for everybody who actually took part in the survey itself. It's really helpful. We do appreciate your time, and hopefully sharing your views with outsiders, with the rest of the market as well. And thank you, all of you who logged in and are still logged in. We hope this has been useful. We will be back with more. Let us know what you need, and let us know how as we said, we can help you map your own route through this ever-evolving landscape. How the overall market reopens and dare I say how successfully will be dependent, as we've seen, on a whole range of factors. Government timetables, support and continuing restrictions are probably the first issue, and it really a big thank you for everyone in the industry, to all those people who have been lobbying government directly or indirectly, raising the profile of the market and the plight of the market. All those people have done a brilliant job, and we thank them. But it's also going to be dependent on the broader, wider economic and business activity, on financial strength of individual businesses, and of course the creativity and resolve of management and their teams. But probably most importantly, the willingness of customers, the British public, to come back. There is a business saying that in times of crisis, there are three real options open to business operators. The first is get big. And there is plenty of evidence that probably the larger quoted companies may be best placed, not least because they are more likely to be able to access capital. The other, get niche. Really provide what the public wants, get close to your customers, even if that is radically different to something you've done before. And that's not just having a one product restaurant in one of our city centres. It may be just being the best local pub in the village or town. Or thirdly, the most radical, get out. Get big, get niche, get out. For some people, unfortunately, they will have no options. Not everybody will survive this crisis. It will be tough. There will be casualties. It is regrettable, but it's going to be the reality. Some other people may well decide to get out themselves. It is not worth carrying on. We've heard plenty of that, and it may be the right time for some people. Other people may get out, but come back again down the road. There are big decisions to make, and it's all too easy at times like this to get lost in the hyperbole of the situation. We all know how daunting it is out there. We don't have to be told. It will change. It will change every day. It will change every week. It will change every month. So let's stay in touch. Let's keep talking, And thank you very much, and hope to see you all very soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Sure.
Thank you.